It bears an image on it, ventral, front and back, dorsal, of a human figure.
Deep inside a climate-controlled server room, a supercomputer is processing millions of data points from a single object, a 14-foot strip of ancient linen, known as the Shroud of Turin. The machine is hunting for order hidden inside chaos. Then suddenly, the algorithm stops. It catches a signal, a repeating symmetrical pattern embedded deep inside the fabric. Not a stain, not paint, a sequence. And now, physicists are being forced to ask a question they never thought they would seriously consider. What if the world's most famous religious relic is actually the record of an event so extreme that modern physics still cannot fully explain it? For decades, the story seemed simple. The cloth was dismissed as a medieval hoax, a clever fake designed to fool believers. But then the AI examined the fibers, and everything changed. Buried beneath the faint image of the man, the system detected mathematical symmetry repeating across the linen like hidden code. Patterns no medieval artist should have been capable of creating. In fact, patterns that no known natural process can fully reproduce even today. It was as if the cloth wasn't painted at all, but encoded. And what the AI may have uncovered inside these ancient threads could completely change how we understand the most mysterious artifact in human history. So before we go deeper into the science, the hidden geometry, and the impossible data locked inside the fabric, subscribe to the channel because this story only gets stranger from here. The image on the shroud is unbelievably superficial. It exists only on the outermost microfibers of the linen threads, thinner than a soap bubble. The color never soaked into the cloth, like paint or dye should. There are no brush strokes, no directionality. It's almost as if the fibers themselves were altered by a sudden burst of energy. When the AI looked at the shroud, it didn't see art. It saw data. What the AI did next was even more disturbing. Using advanced pattern analysis, it filtered out the visual noise inside the fabric to uncover the core structure hidden beneath the image. What emerged wasn't random at all. It was a precise information field. The brightness and darkness across the cloth followed an exact mathematical relationship tied to distance, almost like a physical law. Imagine placing a cloth over a human body. If an artist tried to recreate that image manually, they would rely on shading and visual tricks. But the shroud doesn't behave like a painting. According to the AI analysis, the image intensity directly matches the space between the cloth and the body underneath it. Areas closer to the skin appear darker. Areas farther away become lighter. In other words, the cloth behaves less like artwork and more like a three-dimensional scan. And somehow, it gets even stranger. The system began identifying repeating geometric harmonies throughout the figure itself. The spacing of the eyes, the shape of the torso, the proportions of the hands, even the curve of the ribs, all followed hidden mathematical relationships buried inside the image. These patterns remained invisible for centuries because they were masked by the texture of the linen. But the AI detected them immediately. That creates a massive problem for the forgery theory. Because if this image was created in the Middle Ages, then whoever made it would have needed knowledge far beyond their time. They would need to understand geometry, optics, physics, anatomy, and microscopic surface chemistry at an almost impossible level. It would mean a medieval artist somehow created invisible mathematical precision directly into linen fibers. The AI came to a shocking conclusion. The image doesn't behave like a painting at all. It behaves like a projection. And that realization is forcing scientists into uncomfortable territory. because the most famous religious relic on Earth may actually contain information encoded by a process modern science still cannot reproduce. The debate over whether the cloth is ancient or medieval suddenly becomes less important. The real mystery is this: even if it were made centuries later, how could anyone place accurate 3D spatial data into fabric? It would be like discovering a hidden QR code inside a Renaissance painting. It simply shouldn't exist. The AI revealed that the shroud is not merely an image, it is a stored data record that humanity may only now be technologically capable of reading. But the deeper analysis uncovered something even more unsettling. The system examined the empty areas surrounding the body image. Normally, in a forgery, the background contains random contamination, brush residue, or meaningless texture. But here, the AI found something researchers describe as data silence. Only the regions corresponding to the body were altered. Everywhere else remained untouched. That means whatever produced the image acted with extraordinary selectivity and precision. Even stranger, the image formation appears highly directional. The energy responsible moved in perfectly straight parallel lines, a phenomenon called collimation. Today, achieving that level of control requires laser technology. Think about a flashlight beam. As it travels, it spreads outward and becomes blurry, but the microscopic details of the shroud image remain incredibly sharp. The image never diffuses, it never scatters. The AI flagged this as a major physical anomaly because it appears to ignore the normal behavior expected from light and energy, which leads to an unsettling possibility. This cloth may have captured a moment involving physics we still don't fully understand. And to understand why researchers are so disturbed by these findings, we have to go back long before artificial intelligence ever entered the picture. The strange behavior of the shroud didn't begin with modern computers. Scientists have been stumbling into impossible details for over a century. Back in 1898, an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia took the first photograph of the Shroud of Turin. As he developed the image inside his darkroom, he reportedly became stunned. The faint figure visible on the cloth suddenly transformed into a remarkably detailed positive image on the photographic negative. In other words, the cloth itself behaved like a photographic negative, centuries before photography even existed. That detail alone creates a serious historical problem. How could a medieval artist intentionally create an inverted image designed to be properly revealed only through photographic processing technology that wouldn't exist for another 500 years? It would be like someone secretly embedding computer code into a manuscript written during the Middle Ages, and things only became stranger from there. In the 1970s, scientists working with equipment similar to systems used by NASA fed the shroud image into a VP8 image analyzer, a device designed to convert brightness into topographical depth. Normally, when you run an ordinary photograph through the machine, the result becomes distorted and chaotic. Shadows confuse the system because dark areas don't necessarily represent physical depth. But when researchers analyzed the shroud image, the result shocked them. Instead of distortion, the machine generated a clean, three-dimensional human form. The darker regions accurately matched areas physically closer to the cloth. The lighter regions corresponded to greater distance. The image contained legitimate depth information. That discovery trapped researchers inside a contradiction that still hasn't been resolved. The cloth appears medieval, according to some dating methods, yet the image behaves like something produced using technology far beyond the medieval world. And this is where modern AI changed everything again. The neural networks removed centuries of interference from the data, including burn damage from the 1532 fire and distortions caused by the linen weave itself. What remained was astonishingly precise anatomical mapping. But the most unsettling part was this. The body appears to pass through the cloth. The image formation matches a concept known as volumetric projection. It's almost as if the body emitted energy outward for a fraction of a second, imprinting distance information directly into the fibers. The discoloration exists only on the outermost surface of the threads. It never deeply penetrates the material. Paint would soak inward. Heat would spread sideways. But this image remains incredibly controlled, microscopic, and vertically aligned. According to the AI analysis, whatever formed it moved in straight lines with extraordinary precision. Then researchers examined another controversial detail. For decades, some investigators claimed faint impressions of Roman coins could be seen over the eyes of the figure, possibly coins linked to the era of Pontius Pilate. Most historians dismissed the claim, but enhanced AI contrast analysis reportedly identified circular patterns in the orbital regions, matching the approximate dimensions of 1st century Roman leptons. If accurate, that would place the cloth within the years 29 to 36 AD. And again, the implications become difficult to explain. A medieval forger would not only need access to extremely rare ancient coins, but would also need to embed their impressions so subtly that they would remain nearly invisible until discovered centuries later using digital enhancement software. Then the AI examined the blood itself. Researchers concluded it was not pigment or paint, but actual human blood, identified as type AB. But another mystery appeared immediately. The blood still retains an unusual reddish coloration. Normally, ancient blood darkens over time due to oxidation. The spectral analysis suggested elevated levels of bilirubin, a compound associated with extreme physical trauma and severe bodily stress. And that discovery opened an entirely new layer of questions scientists still cannot fully, but the AI uncovered another detail that may be even harder to explain. The blood appears to have reached the cloth before the image itself was formed. How can researchers tell? Because underneath the bloodstains, there is no body image at all. The AI detected that the image formation process never altered the fibers beneath the blood. That means the blood soaked into the linen first, and only afterward did whatever created the image occur. That completely destroys the traditional painting theory. If this were painted by a medieval artist, they would somehow need to apply the blood first, then perfectly create the negative body image around those stains without accidentally overlapping them. At that microscopic level, that's practically impossible by hand. According to the AI analysis, the evidence no longer behaves like artwork. It behaves more like photographic film, exposed to some unknown burst of radiation. And the implications are enormous, because if the cloth truly recorded an event, then something physically happened to that body, something capable of releasing a tremendous amount of energy. The AI may actually be detecting the residual signature of that event. But then, the entire timeline of the mystery suddenly began to collapse, because hidden inside the cloth was a repaired section that may have fooled the world for decades. For many people, the case seemed closed in 1988. That was the year 3 laboratories, Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona, performed radiocarbon dating tests on the Shroud of Turin. Using accelerator mass spectrometry, scientists measured carbon-14 levels in the linen. The results pointed to a date range between 1260 and 1390 AD. The media immediately declared the mystery solved. The shroud was labeled medieval, case closed. Except the story didn't stay that simple for very long. Almost immediately, researchers started questioning the sample itself. To avoid damaging the cloth, officials removed material from only one small corner. But that specific area had experienced centuries of handling during public displays. People touched it constantly. Smoke from candles surrounded it. Sweat, contamination, and environmental exposure built up over hundreds of years. And then there was the fire of 1532. After the blaze damaged portions of the shroud, nuns repaired sections of the fabric using a method called invisible reweaving, a technique so precise that replacement threads could blend seamlessly into the original cloth. One scientist in particular began investigating this issue more deeply. Raymond Rogers examined leftover fibers from the exact sample used during the 1988 carbon dating test. Under microscopic analysis, he discovered something startling. The tested corner fibers were chemically different from the rest of the shroud. The sample area contained cotton fibers and traces of plant gum coatings. The main body of the cloth is almost entirely linen. Researchers also detected dye pigments, apparently used to match repaired threads to the older material. His conclusion caused major controversy. The labs may not have dated the original shroud at all. They may have dated a medieval repair patch. It would be like trying to determine the age of an ancient monument by testing a modern repair someone added centuries later. Suddenly, the famous carbon dating result no longer looked definitive. Then newer technologies entered the picture. Scientists began analyzing the linen using wide-angle X-ray scattering, a technique that studies how flax cellulose naturally degrades over time at the atomic level. Unlike carbon dating, this method is far less vulnerable to contamination from repairs or surface debris. The findings surprised many researchers. The structural decay inside the fibers appeared consistent with ancient textiles discovered at Masada, dating roughly between 55 and 74 AD. Additional spectroscopy studies produced similar estimates, placing the cloth much closer to the 1st century than the medieval era. So now the situation becomes deeply complicated. One controversial carbon-14 test suggests the Middle Ages. Multiple newer analyses suggest an origin nearly 2,000 years old. And then the AI introduced yet another layer to the mystery. The system compared the shroud to another artifact known as the Sudarium of Oviedo, a smaller cloth preserved in Spain, and traditionally believed to have covered the same victim's face shortly after death. Unlike the shroud, the Sudarium has historical records tracing it back centuries before the medieval period. The AI compared the blood patterns found on both cloths. The match was astonishingly close. The blood type aligned. The stain geometry also matched when researchers digitally overlaid the two cloths together. If both fabrics truly covered the same face, then the implications become difficult to ignore. Because if the Sudarium predates the Middle Ages, the shroud likely must as well. And at that point, the forgery theory begins collapsing under its own weight. To maintain the hoax explanation, you would need to believe that a medieval creator somehow produced a microscopic negative image containing encoded 3D anatomical data, matched ancient linen degradation patterns, and secretly coordinated those details with another relic stored in Spain. The scenario starts sounding less like forgery and more like science fiction. The AI essentially bypassed decades of historical arguments and focused purely on physical behavior. And according to the data, the cloth does not behave like paint, rubbing, or traditional artwork. It behaves like evidence. researchers are increasingly treating the shroud less as a religious object and more like a forensic scene, frozen in time. Because something may have happened to that body that current physics struggles to explain. We've ruled out pigment, we've ruled out simple heat transfer, we've ruled out conventional chemical reactions. So what could possibly create a microscopic, three-dimensional negative image on linen without destroying the cloth itself? This is where the theories become extremely controversial. But they are being driven by the data. One of the leading scientific ideas involves something called vacuum ultraviolet radiation. Researchers working with advanced laser systems in Italy attempted to recreate the shroud image by exposing linen to extremely short bursts of ultraviolet energy. And surprisingly, they discovered that specific wavelengths could discolor only the outermost surface fibers, matching the same shallow image depth seen on the shroud. But there was a massive problem. To reproduce the full image on a human-sized cloth, the energy required would be almost unimaginable. Researchers estimated it would take an enormous burst of vacuum UV radiation, lasting less than a fraction of a second. Too weak and no image would form. Too strong, and the linen would instantly burn apart. Too long, and the cloth would be destroyed completely. The process would need to occur with impossible precision. And that's where the mystery takes a dramatic turn. Because according to the AI-assisted analysis, the image may have been created by an extremely brief release of energy, unlike anything normally encountered in nature. According to the interpretation supported by the AI analysis, the body inside the Shroud of Turin may not have simply decayed in the normal biological sense. Some researchers believe something far stranger happened. Their theory suggests the body underwent a sudden transformation, almost as if matter itself converted directly into energy. That idea comes from Albert Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, E equals mc squared, E equals mc squared. The equation shows that even a tiny amount of matter contains an enormous amount of energy. If some kind of unknown event caused the atoms of a human body to rapidly transition or collapse, the result could theoretically produce an intense burst of radiation. And here's where things become deeply unsettling. The AI found that the image on the cloth behaves orthographically. In simple terms, the energy appears to have traveled in perfectly straight vertical lines. It didn't spread outward like an explosion or normal light source would. That detail matters because natural radiation typically expands in all directions. This didn't. The pattern suggests an unusually controlled event. Some physicists compare it to the concept of an event horizon around a black hole, except instead of gravity collapsing space, this would involve a biological state transition where matter itself suddenly changed phase. Another explanation gaining attention is known as the corona discharge theory. In this scenario, the body became surrounded by an enormous electrostatic charge, producing a powerful plasma discharge capable of marking the linen surface. The AI reportedly identified branching patterns resembling high-voltage electrical fractals called Lichtenberg figures, the same kinds of structures sometimes left behind after lightning strikes. But the most controversial theory of all may be the multidimensional hypothesis. A few theoretical physicists studying the AI-generated depth mapping noticed something unusual about the geometry of the image. It resembles what might happen if a three-dimensional object interacted with a lower-dimensional surface. Think about it this way. If a 3D object passed through a completely flat 2D world, the inhabitants of that world would only see a changing cross-section of the object. Some researchers speculate the reverse may have occurred here. If a body somehow transitioned into a higher dimensional state, the process could leave behind an energy imprint. almost like a shadow, projected onto our three-dimensional reality. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring mysteries like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the unknown.